The night I understood that my family had never truly loved me was the night I sat at the head of the table at my father's 60th birthday dinner, watching my mother place a stack of papers in front of me as if she were laying a knife on the white tablecloth. Then say in the gentle voice I had spent my whole life mistaking for love, "If you really see us as your family, Daniel, you'll sign this tonight." There were 13 people in the Hayes dining room that evening. There was the chocolate cake my father liked, the unlit number 60 candles, the smell of roast beef charred at the edges, the dishwasher clattering away in the kitchen, and the family photographs hanging on the wall, in every one of which I always stood slightly off to the side, like someone who had arrived late. My sister, Emily, sat to my mother's left, one hand resting on her 7-month pregnant belly, the other holding her husband's hand. My brother, Mark, leaned back in his chair, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone, his eyes tired, as if my very presence had ruined the evening. My father, Robert Hayes, sat at the opposite end of the table, his face red from wine, but his eyes still sober enough to feel cold. He was not looking at me like a son. He was looking at me like an overdue bill. I was 34 years old enough to know that a lawyer's packet never appeared at a birthday dinner just because it was convenient. Old enough to understand that when an entire family suddenly went silent, it meant they had already discussed everything beforehand and were only waiting for me to step into the trap they had laid across a white tablecloth. And still I asked, because somewhere inside me there was still a 7-year-old boy who had once believed that if he was obedient enough, considerate enough, if he made everyone happy enough, then in the end, someone would hold him. "What is this?" I said. My voice sounded rougher than I expected. My mother, Linda, smiled. She had always had that kind of smile, whenever she was about to make me feel guilty. "It's nothing terrible, sweetheart. Just paperwork to transfer your share of the rights in this house over to your father and me. Your father is getting older, and I don't have the strength to manage everything anymore. Emily is about to have a baby. Mark is trying to get back on his feet after the business situation. The family needs stability." She pushed the papers a little closer to me. The edge of the stack touched my water glass. I looked down and saw my name on the first line, Daniel Bennett Hayes. I had never used the name Bennett. I had never even known that, in any family document, I had a middle name like that. "What kind of rights do I have in this house?" I asked. It was a simple question, but it froze the room solid. Emily lowered her eyes. Mark exhaled sharply. My father set his wineglass down so hard that the stem clicked against the tabletop. My mother was still smiling, but the smile had thinned. "Don't start this on your father's birthday." I looked at my father. All my life, I had been afraid of disappointing him. I was afraid of the way his thick brows pulled together, afraid of his sigh, afraid of the sentence, "I don't know what kind of man I raised you to be." I had been the child who picked up empty cans in the garage so he wouldn't have to bend down, the teenager who skipped prom to take my mother to a doctor's appointment, the grown man who transferred money into the family account every month, even while living in an apartment where the heater rattled like it was about to explode. And yet that night, when my father looked at me, I did not see disappointment. I saw anger because the obedient ox he had trained had suddenly lifted its head. "Daniel," he said, slow and heavy, "don't make a scene. You know what this family has done for you." I had heard that sentence thousands of times, in thousands of different shapes. When I was 10 and wanted a pair of basketball shoes like the other boys had, my mother said, "You know how much this family has sacrificed for you." When I was 16 and got invited to summer camp, my father said, "After everything your mother and I have done, you still want us to spend more money." When I was 22 and received a partial scholarship to a school far from home, my mother cried in the kitchen, saying her heart would break if I left, that my father needed help, that Emily was still young, that Mark was difficult, that I was the only one she could count on. I stayed. I went to community college at night, worked during the day, fixed the roof on weekends, picked Mark up from the police station when he was arrested for drunk driving, paid the deposit on Emily's first apartment when she wanted to try living independently, then paid the fee to break the lease when she changed her mind 3 months later. I thought that was love. I thought that was what family meant. The stronger person carried the weaker ones. I had never asked myself why, in that house, the stronger person was always me, while the ones who were loved were always someone else. "I just want to know why my name is on the paperwork for this house," I said. My mother immediately lifted a hand to her chest, as if I had slapped her. "Are you questioning me?" She did not ask whether I understood. She did not explain. She did not stay calm. She turned my question into her wound. That was my mother's greatest talent. She could take anything I said, wrap it in tears, and hand it back to me as proof that I was cruel. Emily looked up, her eyes red. "Daniel, please. Not today." I looked at my sister. She was 31, but she still spoke to me in the voice of the 10-year-old girl who had once run into my room crying because she had broken my mother's vase and then let me take the blame. "Did you know about this?" I asked. Emily bit her lip. Her husband, Tyler, looked down at his plate. Their silence answered before their mouths could. Mark let out a dry laugh. "God, you're acting like you're the victim here. This family raised you, gave you a last name, gave you a place to live. Now you're asked to sign one paper to help the family, and you're performing like you're being robbed." The phrase, "gave you a last name," flew across the table and struck me in the face. No one scolded Mark. No one told him he had gone too far. My father just looked into his wineglass. My mother closed her eyes as if in prayer. I felt as though a very old door in my mind had just cracked open after years of being sealed shut with paint and dust. "Gave me a last name?" I repeated. Mark realized he had said too much, but instead of stopping, he shrugged. "I mean, you know, you've always been part of this family. Don't turn that into a problem." My father suddenly stood. The chair scraped across the hardwood floor with a shriek that made Emily's little nephew start crying. "Enough. Sign or don't sign, but don't sit here interrogating the people who raised you like you're some lawyer." I did not sign. I did not scream either. There are moments in life when your silence drives people crazier than any shouting ever could. I simply folded the papers, placed them beside my untouched plate, and stood up. My mother began to cry for real, or at least the tears were real. I still wasn't sure what emotion lay beneath them. "You're going to leave during your father's birthday?" she asked. "You're going to humiliate me in front of everyone?" I looked around the table. The faces of relatives who had pinched my cheeks when I was little, who had once said, "Daniel is the best-behaved one in the family," were now looking at me as if I were a traitor. Aunt Karen whispered to her husband, but loudly enough for me to hear, "He's always been so cold." I almost laughed. If I was cold, why did my chest hurt so badly I could barely breathe? If I was selfish, why had I spent more than half my life paying a debt no one had ever shown me the bill for? Before I left the dining room, my mother called after me, her voice breaking. "Daniel, don't you forget who chose you when nobody wanted you." I stopped in the doorway. That sentence turned my entire body cold. Nobody wanted you. When I was little, I had heard fragments of a story about how I was born premature, about how my mother had gone through a very difficult time, about how my father had had to work 2 jobs to pay the hospital bills. Whenever I asked more, my mother would stroke my hair and say, "It's a sad old story. You don't need to know. What matters is that you're here, with the family that loves you." That night, for the first time, I realized that real love does not need to bury a child's past in order to keep him obedient. I drove back to my apartment in the rain. It was late October in suburban Pennsylvania, the season when maple trees blazed red by day and rotted beneath tires by night. The windshield wipers dragged across the glass as if trying to erase everything I had just seen. But the more they wiped, the blurrier it became. My phone kept buzzing on the passenger seat. My mother called. Emily texted, "You're making everything worse." Mark texted, "Don't come back here expecting an apology if you keep this attitude." My father sent nothing. He had never chased after me in my life. He simply stood still and trusted that the world would push me back. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building, across from a 24-hour laundromat. I rented it because it was close to work and cheap, even though every time a freight train passed, the windows shook as if someone were pounding from outside. I worked as a warehouse manager for a medical equipment company. It was not the job I had once dreamed of, but it was stable, with insurance and overtime. I had given up so many dreams that I no longer remembered their faces. In my small living room on the bookshelf, I kept 3 family photographs. The first was of me standing beside my father at Little League, holding a baseball glove too big for my hand. My father's arm was not around my shoulders. He was looking at Mark, who was 4 at the time, and running onto the field. The second was my high school graduation. My mother held the bouquet, but her eyes were turned toward Emily, who was crying because her stomach hurt. The third was Christmas when I was 28, all of us wearing red sweaters. I stood behind the sofa, both hands on my mother's shoulders, smiling like a gatekeeper who had been allowed into the photograph after locking everything up. That night, I took all 3 photographs down and laid them face down on the table. Then I opened the packet I had brought with me. In the chaos, no one had taken it back. Maybe they trusted that I was still the old Daniel. the one who would read the phrase for the good of the family and feel ashamed. The old Daniel had started dying the moment Mark said, "Gave you a last name." I read every page slowly. The legal language was dry, but certain words rose up like blood on snow. Renunciation of beneficiary rights, transfer authorization, Bennett family settlement, real property located at 418 Maple Hollow Road, primary beneficiary Daniel Bennett. I read the address again and again. 418 Maple Hollow Road. That was my parents' house, not the house they had paid for over 30 years with sweat and sacrifice, as I had always been told. Not the house whose fence I had repainted every summer, whose gutters I had cleaned every fall, whose back roof I had repaired with my own savings. According to these papers, somehow, I had rights in that house, and they wanted me to sign them away during a birthday dinner in front of everyone, when the pressure of family could make it hard to breathe. I did not sleep. Near 3 in the morning, after the rain stopped and the streets glowed faintly under the streetlights, I called the only person in my life who had never told me I owed her anything. Mrs. Elena Alvarez, the Hayes family's old neighbor. She had lived next door to us for more than 20 years. Her husband had died young, and her children lived far away. When I was little, whenever my house got too loud, I would go over and help her water the tomato plants. She gave me waffles, taught me a few phrases in Spanish, and sometimes looked at me for a long time as if she wanted to say something and then decided not to. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice sleepy but worried. "Daniel, are you all right?" Those 4 words made my throat close. At home, if I called in the middle of the night, the first thing they usually said was, "What happened now?" I said, "Mrs. Elena, I need to ask you something. Do you know anything about the name Bennett?" The other end of the line went silent for a very long time. So long I thought the call had dropped. Then she exhaled, the tired breath of someone who had been holding a secret for too many years. "So they finally tried to make you sign." I sat up straight. The whole room seemed to tilt. "What did you say, Mrs.?" Elena did not answer right away. I heard the sound of her pulling out a chair, the sound of a teacup touching a table. "Can you come here tomorrow morning? What do you know?" I asked. My voice had begun to shake. "Not over the phone, sweetheart." "Mrs. Elena," I was almost pleading. "I've lived 34 years in that house. I have a right to know who I am." This time her voice softened. "Your birth mother's name was Mary Bennett, and Linda Hayes is not the woman who gave birth to you." I do not remember how I hung up. I only remember sitting on the living room floor until morning, my back against the sofa, the packet open on my knees. "Not the woman who gave birth to you." The sentence did not explode inside me like it does in movie. It fell very lightly, like the first snow of winter. Then it covered everything. My mother was not my mother. The woman who had wiped my forehead when I had a fever, kissed the scrapes on my knees, and said, "I love you," every night when I was small had not given birth to me. I wanted to feel angry at once, wanted to break something, wanted to run to the Hayes house and scream in their faces. But the first thing I felt was shame, as if it were my fault for not knowing, for being too easy to fool, for standing in family photos with the smile of a child who did not realize he had been placed in the frame last. The next morning, I drove to Mrs. Elena's house. Maple Hollow Road appeared in front of me, familiar enough to hurt. Low brick houses, trimmed lawns, white mailboxes. The old oak tree on the corner where Mark once fell and broke his arm, and I carried him home, even though I was only 12. The Hayes house sat at the end of the row, its front door painted dark blue, the porch holding the 2 rocking chairs my father had built and I had repaired. I slowed as I passed it out of habit. My father's car was in the driveway. The living room curtains were half drawn. I saw my mother's shadow pass across the window. For 1 second, my body wanted to turn into the driveway, knock on the door, apologize for leaving, and wait for my mother to cry and my father to silently forgive me. The habit of being a good son is a chain that does not need a lock. Mrs. Elena opened the door before I could knock. She was over 70 now, her gray hair tied low, her frame small but her eyes as sharp as they had been when I was a child. She did not hug me right away. Maybe she knew that if she did, I would break. She only placed a hand on my cheek and whispered, "You look like your mother when you're angry." I stepped into the kitchen, which smelled of coffee. On the table sat an old blue tin, the kind that once held Christmas cookies. She placed her hand on it but did not open it. "I promised Mary," she said. "She made you promise. Your mother made me promise that if one day you asked, I would tell you the truth. Not before. She was afraid that if I told you when you were still little, they would take you far away." "Who are they?" I asked, though I already knew. She looked toward the window, where the roof of the Hayes house could be seen beyond the fence. Linda and Robert, I sat down. Mrs. Elena opened the tin. Inside were photographs, letters, a small silver child's bracelet tarnished with age, and an old newspaper clipping. The first photograph showed a woman with dark brown hair and gray eyes, standing on a lawn while holding a little boy of about 3. The boy was smiling with his teeth showing, his hands clinging to her neck. I knew it was me before Mrs. Elena said anything, not because I remembered the moment, but because something in my body recognized a warmth that had been lost. The woman in the picture had a wide smile, her head tilted slightly to the left, exactly the way I did when I felt shy. On the back of the photograph in rounded handwriting were the words, "Danny and Mom, last summer at Maple Hollow." I touched the word Mom with my fingertip lightly, as if I were afraid it would disappear. Mrs. Elena sat across from me, her eyes red. Mary was Linda's half-sister. Same mother. They were not close. Mary was different from Linda. Loud, stubborn, always laughing, terrible at baking, but she loved you the way people love light after a long winter. I wanted to ask why I did not remember her, but then hazy fragments of memory rose to the surface. The scent of almond hand cream, the sound of someone singing the wrong words in a car, a yellow scarf tied to a backpack, the feeling of being lifted high under a tree. I had thought they were dreams, or memories of Linda when she was younger. How did she die? I asked. Mrs. Elena took a deep breath. A car accident. You were 4. Mary was on her way home after a night shift at the hospital. A truck ran a red light. She died at the scene. I closed my eyes. An empty place in my life suddenly had a shape. I had lost my mother when I was 4. I had not been abandoned. I had not been unwanted. My mother had died, and for 30 years, my family had let me believe that my origins were something shameful I should not ask about. My birth father, my voice sounded as if it belonged to someone else. Mrs. Elena took out another envelope. Inside was a photograph of a man in a firefighter's uniform, dark blonde hair, a gentle smile, his hand resting on Mary's shoulder. Thomas Bennett, he died 2 years before Mary, in a warehouse fire. You were only 2. I looked at his face. No memory came, only the strange feeling of seeing a stranger with my chin. So Linda and Robert adopted me? Mrs. Elena nodded. They became your legal guardians. Mary did not have much family. Linda was her half-sister. Robert acted very respectable at the time. They said you would stay close to where you had grown up, close to your friends, close to your mother's memories. She paused, then pushed a thin folder across the table. But Mary and Thomas left you more than memories. I opened the folder. There were copies of wills, life insurance documents, Thomas's workers' compensation settlement, the insurance payout after Mary's death, and a trust called the Bennett Family Settlement. Sole beneficiary, Daniel Bennett. Guardians authorized to manage it until I turned 25. Linda Hayes and Robert Hayes. The assets included the property at 418 Maple Hollow Road, purchased in part by Mary with Thomas's settlement money before she died. The rest paid off by insurance. The house where I had lived like a grateful son, allowed to stay there, had belonged to my mother before it belonged to anyone in the Hayes family. No, I said, a small, useless word. That can't be, Mrs. Elena placed her hand over mine. I'm sorry. I turned page after page, my vision blurring. There were withdrawals when I was 6, 8, 12, minor child care expenses, residential repairs, family education, medical. I saw the year Emily entered private school. I saw the year Mark got his first car. I saw a large withdrawal that matched the time my father opened a repair business and failed. Every memory in me began to change color. Every time my mother said there was not enough money because I was expensive. Every time my father reminded me that I had to be grateful I had been raised. Every time I gave up something I wanted so the family would have less trouble. They had not only taken my money, they had taken my right to grieve my real mother. They had taken the story of my life and rewritten it, so I would always be their debt. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. Not because I wanted to blame her, but because the pain was so large I needed someone standing near the wound. Mrs. Elena did not look away. Because I was a coward. Because Linda threatened that if I interfered, she would cut me out of your life. Because the lawyer said the guardians had the right to decide. Because when you were small, every time I thought about telling you, you looked at Linda with such loving eyes that I didn't know whether breaking that was the right thing to do. Tears fell onto the back of her wrinkled hand. I waited for you to ask, but you didn't ask. They taught you too well that asking was ungrateful. I could not hate her, because in that room, between the tin box and the papers, she was the first person who had called Mary my mother without being afraid I would hear it. When I left Mrs. Elena's house, I took the tin box with me and the phone number of a lawyer named Samuel Reed, who had once worked on Mary's estate. On the drive home, Emily called. I did not answer. She texted, "Mom cried all night. Dad's blood pressure is up. Are you happy now?" I pulled into the parking lot of a gas station and stared at the message for a long time. 10 years ago, one sentence like that would have been enough to make me turn around. 5 years ago, I would have apologized even if I didn't know what I had done wrong. Even a week earlier, I probably would have transferred more money to help Mom and Dad with the stress. But that morning, I opened the tin box on the passenger seat, took out the photograph of Mary holding me, and set it beside my phone. A woman who had been dead for 30 years could not protect me, but her smile in that photograph made me want to protect the little boy inside me for the first time. I met with Attorney Reed 3 days later in his small downtown office. He was nearly 70, with white hair, thin-framed glasses, and a slow, precise way of speaking. When I handed him the papers the Hayes family had tried to make me sign, he looked through them for less than 5 minutes before removing his glasses. "Who gave you this?" "My mother, Linda Hayes." He was silent for a moment. "She is not your birth mother." Hearing a stranger say that truth in a professional voice hurt more than hearing it from Mrs. Elena. It turned the truth into a file, not a nightmare. "I only just found out," I said. Mr. Reed sighed and opened the filing cabinet behind him. "I tried to contact you when you turned 25. Several times, letters sent to the Maple Hollow address were either returned or never answered. I called the house. A woman said you did not want anything to do with the Bennett estate, that you knew everything and had agreed to let Linda keep managing it because you were financially unstable." I laughed. The sound came out of my throat dry as burned paper. "I knew nothing. I suspected as much, but I had no other address for you. And when the guardians provided documents with your signature." He stopped. "With my signature?" I asked. He took out a copy of a power of attorney signed when I was 25. The signature at the bottom read Daniel B. Hayes. At a glance, it looked like mine, but the B curved strangely, and the final H was too sharp. I remembered being 25. I was working 2 shifts, sleeping 4 hours a night, paying off the loan Mark had taken after damaging someone else's car. I had never sat down with a lawyer. I had never signed anything related to the Bennett settlement. "That is not my signature," I said. Attorney Reed did not look surprised. Perhaps his profession had shown him too many families turning love into an instrument. He only made a note and said, "If that's true, we have a serious problem." "Is there anything left?" I asked. "There may still be a claim to part of the house, depending on whether certain past transactions can be invalidated. There may also be a civil claim for mismanagement of the trust. But I'll be honest, a lot of the money may be gone. Too much time has passed. Some withdrawals will be difficult to prove. And if you decide to pursue this, it will get ugly." I looked down at my hands that had painted the house, hauled furniture, fixed sinks, signed checks, and driven people to hospital. Hands belonging to a son trained to help before asking why. "It's already ugly," I said. "I'm just seeing it now." Over the following weeks, the Hayes family moved from tears to anger, from anger to silence, and from silence to organized attack. My mother came first. She showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening without warning. I looked through the peephole and saw her standing in the hallway in a cream wool coat, holding a paper bag. She looked small and tired, exactly like the image that had made me soften my whole life. I opened the door but did not invite her in. That made her pause. "I brought you soup," she said. "Your stomach always hurts when you're stressed." I looked at the bag. It was her chicken soup, the one she made when I was sick. The smell of celery and black pepper drifted through the hallway. Memory can be more merciless than truth, because it does not have to lie to make you weak. "I know now," she said before I could ask. "Mrs. Elena got involved. I suppose she couldn't keep her mouth shut any longer. There was no, 'I'm sorry you had to find out this way.' No, I should have told you. Only blame for the old neighbor who had ruined the peace." "Why didn't you tell me Mary Bennett was my birth mother?" I asked. Linda looked at me as if I had taken a knife to the curtains in the living room. "Because I am your mother, not in the way I had a right to know. I changed your diapers. I took you to school. I stayed up all night when you had fevers. Does blood matter more than that? The truth matters." Her eyes reddened. "The truth is, when Mary died, no one wanted to take on a 4-year-old boy who had nightmares every night. No one. I took you in. Your father took you in. We gave you a decent life." The old sentence came back, sharper this time. No one wanted you. This time, I did not let it sink into me. My mother wanted me. She died. She did not abandon me. Linda's face changed. Very quickly, but I saw it. A flash of jealousy crossed her eyes, cold and old. Mary was always good at making people feel sorry for her. Even after she died, I took half a step back. In my whole life, my mother rarely spoke ill of the dead because she liked the moral high ground. That night the paint cracked. You hated her, I said. Linda tightened her grip on the bag. I was tired of living in my sister's shadow. I was tired of Mary doing anything she wanted and still being adorable, while I had to clean up the mess she left behind. Was I the mess? I asked. She immediately softened her voice. You know I didn't mean that, but she had meant it. Some things only slip out because they have lived inside a person for a very long time. I asked about the trust. She said they had used the money to raise me. I asked about Emily's private school tuition. She said a family was one unit, and money could not be separated dollar by dollar. I asked why I had to work from the age of 14 to buy my own clothes, while my birth mother's trust still existed. She said work had taught me humility. I asked about the forged signature. She went pale, then angry. Are you accusing me of a crime? I'm asking. No, you're letting outsiders poison you against your family. Outsiders. Mrs. Elena was an outsider. The lawyer was an outsider. Mary, my birth mother, was an outsider in Linda's voice too. Only the people who had taken from me called themselves family. When I did not invite her inside, Linda placed the bag of soup on the floor outside my door like evidence of love. One day you'll understand, she said. Love isn't always clean. There are decisions parents have to make to protect their children. Protect me from what? From feeling abandoned. You let me believe I had been abandoned. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For a few seconds, I saw something almost like regret, but it vanished quickly, swallowed by pride. You've always been too sensitive, she said. Mary was too. Then she turned and left. I left the soup in the hallway until morning, not because I wanted to waste it, but because I knew that if I brought it inside, I would eat it. And if I ate it, I would remember her sitting by my bed, blowing on spoonfuls of soup when I was sick. And my heart would try to defend her all over again. Some days, surviving means not opening the door even to the taste of the past. After my mother came Emily. She did not come alone. She brought her pregnant belly, her tears, and an envelope of ultrasound photos. She knew her weapons. We met at a coffee shop near the hospital where she had her prenatal appointments. Emily sat down and placed the black and white baby pictures between us like a charm. You're about to be an uncle, she said. I don't want my child to be born into a broken family. I looked at the blurry image. A baby who knew nothing yet about the emotional debts waiting for him. I don't want that either, I said. Then stop. Emily wiped her tears very beautifully, like someone who had practiced in a mirror. You can hate mom and dad if you want, but don't make this legal. Don't drag the whole family through the mud. Tyler just got promoted. His family doesn't know about any of this. If it gets out, she stopped. I heard the part she did not say. If the truth came out, her perfect image would crack. When did you know? I asked. Emily lowered her eyes to her tea. Know what? Don't. I did not raise my voice. Maybe that was why she understood. She could not perform her way out of it. When I was 16, she said softly, I heard mom and dad arguing. I didn't understand all of it. But you understood I wasn't their biological son. She did not answer. I remembered Emily at 16. She wanted to go on a school trip to Europe. My mother said there wasn't enough money. I worked extra shifts for 3 months, handed her an envelope with $2,000, and said I had saved it so she could go. She hugged me crying and said I was the best brother in the world. That same year, more than $10,000 had been withdrawn from the Bennett Trust for dependent educational expenses. She had known, maybe not everything, but enough to know that when she took money from me, she was drinking from a well I did not know I owned. You've always been my brother, Emily said. That doesn't change. It changes the way you stayed silent. She burst into tears. I was a kid. At 16, yes. What about at 24? When you asked me to co-sign your apartment because your credit was bad. At 28, when you asked me to pay off your credit card debt so Tyler wouldn't find out. At 30, when you said mom and dad needed me to pay for repairs on the roof of a house that may have belonged to me. Emily held her stomach, her face going pale. You're stressing me out. That sentence dragged me back through the years. Emily had always known how to hurt at exactly the right time. When we were small, if she did something wrong and I got angry, she would cry until she hiccuped. And my mother would say, look at your sister. You're older. You need to be the bigger person. She grew into a woman who could turn her own responsibility into someone else's cruelty. But I was no longer 10. I hope you and the baby are healthy, I said, standing. But I won't keep being used as the foundation for everyone else's peace. Emily looked at me as if she did not recognize me. So you're really choosing money over family? I picked up my coat. No, I'm choosing the truth over a family built with money from my dead mother. Mark chose a more direct approach. He waited for me in the company parking lot one late evening. I had just finished my shift, my shoulders aching from inventory work, when I saw him leaning against his old pickup, smoking even though he had sworn he had quit. Mark resembled my father more than anyone. The same square jaw, the same way of standing as if he owned the space, the same belief that the world owed him a second chance, then a third, then a fourth. You happy now? He asked. Mom can't eat. Dad's talking to lawyers. Emily cries all the time. You turned our house into hell. Our house was already hell, Mark. I've just stopped keeping it warm by setting myself on fire. He laughed bitterly. That sounds nice. Did you rehearse it with your lawyer? When did you know? Know that you were adopted. God, who cares? You still grew up in that house. I care. Because now you found money. He stepped closer. The smell of cigarettes and cheap mint hit my face. Don't pretend this is about morals. You're no different from the rest of us. You just found the safe and want the key. I looked at the brother who had slept in my bed for 2 weeks after having nightmares, who had called me instead of our father after crashing his car through a neighbor's fence, who had once cried in the garage because he was afraid he was a failure. I had loved him. That made what he said hurt more. Do you think I'd still be standing here if this were only about money? I think you like being a saint. Your whole life, you've liked acting like you're the one who sacrifices. Now you have an excuse to make everyone kneel and thank you, right? I did not know whether Mark had learned to speak like that from our father, or whether our father saw himself in Mark and loved him more because of. I don't need anyone to kneel, I said. I just need everyone to stop telling me I owe them for not abandoning me. Mark threw his cigarette to the ground and crushed it under his shoe. You want the brutal truth. Fine, Dad never wanted to take you in. Mom forced him because of the trust money. He said a child of Mary's would only bring trouble. Mom said if they took you, they could keep the house. There, happy now, I stood still. The parking lot was wide. The lights yellow, cold wind slipping beneath my collar. I heard trucks moving on the highway in the distance. As soon as Mark finished speaking, his face changed, as if he finally understood what he had done. But there is no way to slide a knife back into its handle after it has already been used. Daniel, he stumbled. I raised a hand to stop him. Thank you, I didn't mean. Oh, you did. You just didn't mean to say it. I walked past him toward my car. Mark called after me, his voice smaller. Are you really going to leave us? I stopped, but I did not turn around. That question should have softened me, but after everything, all I heard was the panic of someone watching a speaking ATM get pulled from the wall. I began remembering things I had once ignored. Fragments of conversation in the kitchen when the adults thought I was asleep. Don't let him see the papers. He looks too much like Mary. The older he gets, the harder he'll be to control. Just remind him about the hospital bills and he'll shut up. I remembered once when I was 12, finding a box in the attic filled with children's things marked Danny B. My mother snatched it away and said it was a donation box that had been delivered by mistake. A week later, the box was gone. I remembered my father getting drunk at Thanksgiving when I was 17, staring at me and saying, "I'm not the dead man you get to worship." Everyone laughed awkwardly. My mother said he had had too much to drink, and I did not understand. I remembered grandmother Dorothy, Linda and Mary's mother, visiting when I was 6. She held me for a long time, cried into my hair, and called me Mary's Danny. After that visit, she never came back. My mother said she was weak and confused. Maybe the truth was that she had come too close to saying what everyone else wanted buried. Attorney Reed helped me obtain copies of the guardianship court records. They included the hearing transcript after Mary's death. Linda had stated that she loved Daniel as her own child and wanted to preserve Mary's assets for the boy's future. Robert signed as co-guardian. There was a judge's signature. There was a list of assets. There was a letter from Mary attached to the will, sealed in the file. When Mr. Reed handed me the copy, his hand lingered longer than usual. "You should read this at home," he said. I did not listen. I opened it right there in my car, parked by the curb under leafless trees. "My darling Danny," the letter began. Those 3 words made me collapse over the steering wheel. I was 34 years old, over 6 feet tall, with calloused hands, a sore back, not much in savings. And I cried like a child because for the first time, I was reading words my real mother had written to me. Mary had written the letter after Thomas died, in case something ever happened to her too. It was not long. She wrote that I loved red fire trucks, hated carrots, liked putting stones in my pockets, and made her sing the same song every night even though she sang badly. She wrote that if I was reading the letter, it meant she was no longer there to tell me the most important thing. You do not owe anyone a debt for loving you. Your father and I loved you before you ever did a single thing for us. You do not have to be good to deserve being kept. You do not have to be useful to deserve being held. You are my home, Danny. If one day you ever find yourself shrinking just to remain in a room, leave that room. I read that last sentence at least 10 times. If one day you ever find yourself shrinking just to remain in a room, leave that room. My mother had died before I was old enough to clearly remember her voice, but she had still left me a way out. The Hayes family had spent 30 years teaching me to shrink. Speak smaller, want less, ask less, need less, grieve less. Mary, from an old piece of paper, told me to stand up straight. When the truth began spreading through the extended family, the story was immediately twisted. Aunt Corinne called me and said she had heard I was trying to throw my parents out of their house. Uncle Paul texted that the law is no substitute for gratitude. A cousin posted something vague on social media. Sad to see people destroy family over money. No one called to ask what had happened. No one asked who Mary was. No one asked why a 34-year-old man had just learned that his birth mother had been erased from his life. My extended family reacted like a threatened body. It did not need to know where the wound was. It only needed to surround the place that was bleeding. One Sunday evening, my father called. It was the first time since the birthday dinner. I answered because my lawyer had told me to keep a record of all communication, and because some part of me still wanted to hear him say something resembling an apology. His voice was hoarse, tired. Come to the house. We'll talk like men. I almost laughed. My whole life, he only called me a man when he wanted me to carry another burden. But I went, not to reconcile, to look at the house one last time with open eyes. The Hayes house was lit when I arrived. The autumn wreath my mother had made still hung on the porch. Inside, everything was familiar enough to feel cruel. The smell of pine wood, the ticking wall clock, the little scratch on the banister I had made while dragging down the suitcase for the college I never left for. In the living room, my father sat in his armchair. My mother stood beside the fireplace. Emily and Mark were there. Tyler, too, sitting silently as if he had been required to attend a meeting. On the coffee table lay a new stack of papers, thicker than the first. I stood in the doorway and did not take off my coat. My mother noticed that detail, and her lips tightened. You're not planning to stay long? No, my father pointed at a chair. Sit down, I can stand. His eyes narrowed. You've changed? No, I've just stopped lowering my head. Mark muttered something, but my father raised a hand. He looked older than he had at the birthday dinner. The skin beneath his eyes sagged. His beard was not fully shaved. A part of me pitied him. I hated that part of myself, but it was there. Love does not die immediately, even when truth wraps its hands around its throat. It thrashes for a long time. My father spoke first. I don't know how Linda handled the paperwork. I worked. I provided for the house. Your mother dealt with the legal things. Linda turned sharply toward him. One sentence, and a 30-year alliance cracked. Robert, he did not look at her. I'm telling the truth. I almost laughed at the shamelessness of it. Now you want to tell the truth? He slammed his hand onto the armrest. Don't use that tone with me. What tone should I use? The tone of the child you reminded every week that he was a burden. He stood up, then sat back down, maybe because his knee hurt. You don't understand what it was like back then. I had 2 little kids, unstable work, and suddenly we had to take you in too. You cried all the time. You called for Mary every night. Linda was obsessed with doing the right thing. I got dragged into it. And the trust money made it easier. He went silent. My mother began to cry. Daniel, please. Every decision I made was for the family. Which family? I asked. Your family. Or mine, the one you erased? Emily stood, one hand holding her belly. Do you have to be so cruel? I looked at her. Cruel is making me call another woman mother for 30 years without ever telling me the name of the woman who gave birth to me. Mom raised you, Emily cried. So what? Do all those years mean nothing? They mean something. That's why this hurts. If they meant nothing, I wouldn't be standing here. My mother stepped closer. What do you want, Daniel? Money, the house. Do you want me to get on my knees? Do you want your father to die of shame? I want to hear you say her name. My mother froze. What? My birth mother's name? Say it. The room went completely still. The wall clock ticked as if counting down. Linda looked at me, her eyes wet, her lips trembling. I saw her fighting herself, not because she did not remember Mary's name, but because saying it in front of me meant admitting that I had another mother, another love, a history she did not own. At last she said very quietly, Mary. My throat tightened. Her full name? She closed her eyes. Mary Bennett. Who was she? Don't make me. Who was she? My voice rang loud enough to make Emily flinch. Linda opened her eyes, and tears spilled over. She was your birth mother. The air in the room changed, not because they did not already know, but because, for the first time, those words had been allowed to exist inside that house. I took the copy of Mary's letter from my coat pocket. She wrote that I didn't have to be useful to be loved. My father turned his face away. Mark stared at the floor. Emily cried silently. My mother looked at the paper as if it were a ghost. I didn't know about that letter, she whispered. I believe you. I put it away. If you had known, you would have hidden it better. The sentence made her step back as if I had struck her. I felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion. My father cleared his throat. Listen, this house, whatever the paperwork says, it is our home. I poured sweat into it. Linda kept it. You grew up here. If you sue the bank, the lawyers, the taxes, all of it will destroy everything. Emily is about to have a baby. Mark is looking for work. Your mother can't handle this. Do whatever you want to me, but don't drag them down. For the first time in my life, I heard my father plead, but even his pleading placed me in the role of the one responsible for carrying the weight. Don't drag them down, as if they had not been standing on my back for 30 years. You're still doing it, I said. Doing what? Turning everyone else's consequences into my duty. Mark suddenly spoke. So you're really going to sue? His voice no longer sounded mocking. There was fear in it. I looked at him, then at Emily, my mother, my father. I had imagined that the confrontation would explode, that there would be screaming, curses, truth bursting out like a storm. But truth, in the end, was very quiet. It stood in the middle of a living room under yellow light. Inside the house my birth mother had once bought, looking at the people who had used love like a contract. My lawyer will handle the legal part, I said. I didn't come here to negotiate. My mother gripped the back of a chair. Then why did you come? I looked around one last time. On the mantel was the most recent family photograph. I stood behind everyone in it, shoulders slightly bent, smiling faintly. I stepped toward it, took the frame down, and opened the clips on the back. My mother panicked. What are you doing? I pulled the photograph out. Behind it, the old cardboard backing fell away, revealing a small, faded picture that had been tucked inside for who knew how long. I had never known it was there. The faded photograph showed Mary sitting on the front steps of this house, me tiny in her lap, with Mrs. Elena beside us, and an awkward homemade birthday cake nearby. Maybe someone had hidden it behind the newer family photo so they would not have to see it, then forgotten it was there. I held the picture. My mother's hands began to tremble. Give that back. It's a photo of my mother, I said. She looked at me, and in that moment, I understood that Linda had not only hidden Mary from me, she had wanted to keep even the proof that Mary had once been happy in that house before her. I'm taking this, I said. You can keep the rest. Daniel, my mother called as I walked toward the door. Her voice was no longer sharp, no longer performing. It was only the voice of a woman who had aged in a matter of minutes. I stopped. Did you ever love me? That question almost killed me, because the answer was yes. I had loved her with all the loyalty of a child who did not know he had been lied to. I had loved her voice singing in the kitchen, her hand on my forehead, the way she folded towels by color, the way she saved the burnt piece of cake because she knew I liked the crispy part. Those things did not disappear just because the truth had arrived, but they were not enough to erase the truth either. Yes, I said. That is the cruelest part. She began to sob. I opened the door. Behind me, my father said very quietly, if you walk out that door, don't come back. I turned and looked at him. All my life, I had feared that sentence. I had believed that being cast out of the family would be the worst thing imaginable. But standing on that threshold, holding the photograph of my real mother, I realized that something far worse was staying in a place where I would only be kept if I continued being used. I know, I said. Then I stepped out. Winter came early that year. The messages continued for weeks. My mother sent photos of meals she had cooked. Emily sent pictures of the baby in her belly, then pictures of the nursery still unfinished, with the message, "Wish Uncle Daniel were here to help." Mark sent one message only. "I'm sorry I said that in the parking lot." I looked at that message longer than all the others. Maybe because it came closest to a real apology from anyone in my family. But apologizing for accidentally saying the truth is not the same as apologizing for living by it. My father sent nothing until Christmas Eve. My phone lit up at 11:47 p.m. Your mother is crying. If you have any decency left, call her. I placed the phone face down. Outside the window, snow fell on the roof of the laundromat, turning white and then quickly dirty beneath the streetlights. I did not go home for Christmas. For the first time in my life, I thought I would feel empty. I was used to driving to Maple Hollow, carrying trays of cookies, fixing strings of lights, washing dishes after dinner while Emily took pictures. Mark watched football, my father slept in his chair, and my mother praised me with the sentence, "I don't know what I'd do without you." That sentence had once made me feel valuable. Now it only sounded like a curse. On Christmas Eve, I went to Mrs. Elena's house. We ate split pea soup, garlic bread, and a lemon cake she said Mary had once loved. She told me how my mother had once danced in the rain in the street, argued with a plumber for overcharging her, and named me Daniel because Thomas said it sounded like the name of someone who knew how to get back up after falling. I sat there listening like a person gathering his own bones from a pile of ash. No story could make up for 30 years of loss, but each one was a stitch. The legal process dragged on, exhausting and ugly. Attorney Reed discovered that many withdrawals from the Bennett Trust would be difficult to recover because too much time had passed or they had been disguised as care expenses. Some documents showed clearer signs of forgery, especially the power of attorney from when I was 25. When the family received the formal letter, Linda was hospitalized after a panic attack. Emily called me 17 times in one day. Aunt Karen sent a 3-page email about forgiveness, without one line about Mary. My father hired his own lawyer and declared that he had not directly handled the finances. Mark vanished from the family conversation, then one evening sent me a photo of a box he had found in the garage. A few things from my childhood, an old silver bracelet like the one Mrs. Elena had kept, and a teddy bear missing one eye. "Do you want this?" he asked. I replied, "Yes." He left the box outside my apartment door without ringing the bell. Inside was a cassette tape labeled Danny 4th Birthday. I had to buy an old cassette player online to hear it. The sound was scratchy and warped, but I could hear Mary laughing. I could hear my tiny voice saying, "Mom, look at me." Then her voice, "I'm looking, Danny. I'm always looking." I listened to that sentence again and again until the tape jammed. In February, Emily gave birth to a son. She named him Noah. She sent a photo of him wrapped in a blue blanket, his face red, his eyes squeezed shut. I looked at the picture and cried, not because I wanted to go back, but because I understood that a newborn child deserved to be loved without becoming a tool to repair adults. I sent a card, a small contribution to a savings account in Noah's name, and did not go to the hospital. Emily texted, "Can you really be this cold to your own nephew?" I typed and deleted many replies. In the end, I wrote only, "I hope Noah grows up never having to pay anyone's emotional debts." She did not answer. In spring, Attorney Reed called me into his office. "There's a settlement offer," he said. The Hayes family agreed to acknowledge my remaining interest in the house and pay a sum of money in exchange for me not pursuing criminal action over the forged signature. The amount was nowhere near what had been lost, but it was enough for me to pay off my personal debt, move out of my old apartment, and begin again. "You don't have to decide right away, Mr. Reed said. I looked out his office window, where pear trees along the street had begun blooming white. Part of me wanted to take it all the way. I wanted court, public records, questioning that would force my parents to tell the truth in front of strangers. I wanted back every dollar, every year, every lie. But another part of me was tired down to the bone. I thought of Mary's letter. "If one day you ever find yourself shrinking just to remain in a room, leave that room." She had not written, "Burn the room down." She had written, "Leave." Maybe leaving was not forgiveness. Maybe leaving was refusing to let my life keep revolving around the people who had already taken too much. I accepted the settlement with one condition. They had to hand over every belonging, photograph, letter, and record related to Mary Bennett and Thomas Bennett that they still had. No negotiations. No choosing what to keep. 3 weeks later, a small moving truck delivered 7 cardboard boxes to the storage unit I rented. No one from the family brought them personally. I was not surprised. Inside the boxes were photo albums, a few of Mary's things, Thomas's old firefighter uniform, my original birth certificate, a recipe notebook in which Mary had made messy notes, and an unsealed envelope. On the outside it said, For Linda, if you find it hard to love the boy. I knew I should not read it, but my name was in it in some way. And my whole life other people had decided what I was allowed to know. I opened it. It was a letter from Mary to Linda, written before she died, perhaps when she made her will. I know we have never been easy with each other, Mary wrote. I know you think I'm selfish, impulsive, always forgiven by Mom. Maybe you're right about some of that, but if anything ever happens to me, please don't let Danny feel like a burden. He is sensitive. He will try to please adults if he thinks love can be lost. Please don't use that against him. If you cannot love him as your son, find someone who can. I would rather he remember me from another house than grow up in a home where he has to be grateful for being tolerated. I sat in the cold storage unit, surrounded by cardboard and dust, holding the letter in trembling hands. Mary had seen the danger before it happened. She knew there was something sharp in her sister. Something hungry, something that could turn a child into evidence in an old rivalry. And Linda had taken me anyway, not because she had not been warned, but because of the house, the trust, the image of the sacrificing sister, and maybe because some twisted part of her wanted to possess the thing Mary had loved most. That was the most brutal truth. Not that I had been adopted, not that money had been taken, not that my signature had been forged. It was that at least one person had known exactly what I needed protection from, had been begged by my mother, and had still chosen to turn my deepest fear into a chain. Linda had not hidden the truth only because she was afraid it would hurt me. She had hidden it because the truth would have freed me from the debt she needed me to believe in. I did not call her. I did not send her a photo of the letter. I did not ask why. Some questions only drag you back into the burning room. I made a copy for my lawyer and placed the original in a protective box beside Mary's letter to me. Then I did something I had never dared do before. I took 2 weeks off work and drove north to Maine, where the records mentioned a small Bennett family cabin that had long since been sold. I did not find the cabin. It had been torn down and replaced by a gray vacation home belonging to someone richer. But the rocky shore behind it was still there, the sea still striking the land, the wind still salty and cold. I stood there with my coat zipped to my chin, holding the photograph of Mary and Thomas, imagining them young, alive, laughing, unaware that their son would grow up calling someone else Mom and Dad. I did not feel peaceful. Peace is too clean a word for that kind of loss. But I felt an emptiness that was no longer filled with lies. Empty but true. When I returned, I moved, not far, only to another town, into an apartment with windows overlooking a row of maple trees and no freight trains in the night. I bought an old wooden table, hung Mary and Thomas's photograph on the wall, not as an altar to sorrow, but as proof that I came from love before I came from betrayal. I started therapy. In the first session, the therapist asked what I wanted to achieve. I said, I want to stop feeling guilty when I don't save everyone. After I said it, I laughed because it sounded so simple. But some simple sentences take a lifetime to say. One afternoon in June, I received an envelope from the Hayes house. There was no return name, but I knew my mother's handwriting. Inside was the old house key and a note. Your father isn't well. I don't know how much time we have left. No matter what happened, this is still your home. Come back. I placed the key on the table. It was old, its teeth worn, the top still flecked with blue paint from the time I had painted the door when I was 19. I picked up my phone and opened my mother's messages. There was a long row of unanswered text. Photos of my father sitting in an exam room. Photos of Noah smiling. A picture of the dinner table with one chair empty. Sentences like, I miss you. You're hurting me. No family is perfect, but family is still family, and Mary would never want you to be like this. That last one made me turn off the screen. The dead should not be used as rope to drag the living back to the place where they were once hanged. I drove to Maple Hollow on a Saturday morning without telling anyone. Not to come home, to return the key. In front of the house, the grass had grown taller than usual. The fence paint was peeling. One of the rocking chairs on the porch leaned to one side. The one I had once repaired had broken again. I parked across the street and sat looking at the house for a long time. I saw myself at 7, running down the steps with an oversized backpack. I saw myself at 15, shoveling snow while Mark pretended to be sick. I saw myself at 22, standing beside the car, my suitcase in the trunk, my mother crying in the doorway, and myself closing the trunk, deciding not to leave. I saw Mary in the photograph, sitting on that very porch, holding me before everything was taken. A house can hold both love and guilt, but that does not mean you have to live inside it. I walked up to the porch. The door opened before I knocked. Linda stood there. She had lost weight. Gray showed at the roots of her hair. Her eyes were swollen. When she saw me, she lifted a hand to her mouth like someone in a movie. But I knew she had been hoping for this scene for a long time. Daniel, just my name, but she said it like a prayer. I placed the key in her palm. The smile that had just started forming on her mouth died. You're not coming in? No. She closed her fingers around the key. Your father is asleep. He asked for you. I looked over her shoulder. The living room was dark, the curtains half drawn. On the wall, I saw the empty space where the family photo used to hang. Maybe they had taken it down. Maybe they could not stand the hole I had left behind. I hope he gets better, I said. Linda's voice trembled. I'm sorry, I stood still. Those two words should have come a long time ago. Before the lawyer, before the settlement, before everything became impossible to say. But they had arrived, and I let them stand between us like a child who had come too late. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, she continued. I'm sorry about the money, about the papers, about everything. I looked at her carefully. There was pain in her eyes. There was regret, but there was also expectation. She apologized like someone putting a coin into a machine, waiting for the door to open. I was not angry about that. I simply realized that I was no longer responsible for rewarding anyone just because they finally said the right thing. I hear you, I said, but I'm not coming back. Her face broke. You can forgive and still keep your distance. I don't know if I forgive you. Then what am I supposed to do? She asked it like a mother asking her son, but also like someone used to handing me the repair work. I shook my head. This time you have to live with what you did by yourself. She cried quietly. I love you, Daniel. I looked at the woman who had raised me, hurt me, loved me in a way tangled with ownership, jealousy, need, and fear. I believed she loved me. That was the most complicated part. But love is not enough if it loves what it can use, and not the truth of who you are. Maybe, I said, but you loved me like someone afraid of losing property, not like someone who wanted me to be free. She had no answer. I stepped back from the door. Goodbye, Linda. It was the first time I had called her by her name. She flinched as if I had closed the door, though the door was still open. I went down the steps. Behind me, she called, Danny. I stopped for 1 second. That name sounded wrong in her mouth, not because she had no right to say it, but because she had buried it for too long. I did not turn around. On the way back to my car, I saw Mark standing at the side of the house, hands in his jacket pockets. He did not call out to me. I did not call out to him, but when I opened my car door, he said, Are you going to be okay? I looked at him over the roof of the car. For the first time, there was no demand in his voice, only a question. I don't know, I said honestly, but I won't be okay if I stay. Mark nodded very slightly. Maybe that was the only goodbye he knew how to give. When I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. Linda was still standing in the doorway. Mark stood under the oak tree. The house grew smaller, then disappeared behind the curve where summer leaves covered the road in green. I used to think leaving would feel like victory. Loud music, a slammed door, the sun rising brilliantly at the end of the highway. But in truth, leaving is very quiet. It is continuing to drive even when your hands are shaking. It is not turning back when your phone lights up. It is going home to a new apartment, dropping your car keys into a ceramic bowl, making a cup of coffee, sitting down at an old wooden table, and listening to a silence that does not demand you fix it. That night, I opened Mrs. Alina's tin box and read Mary's letter again. You do not have to be good to deserve being kept. Outside the window, wind moved through the maple trees. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Emily. Mom said you came. Are you really gone? I watched the screen until it went dark. Then I placed the phone in a drawer and did not answer. I do not know how the Hayes family's story ends. Maybe my father will never admit his part. Maybe my mother will tell the relatives that I was manipulated by a lawyer and an old neighbor. Maybe Emily will teach her son to call me the cold uncle who walked away. Maybe Mark, one night, will understand that the truth did not only cost me my family. It also gave me my first chance at a life that did not require permission from other people's pain. I do not control the stories they tell about me anymore. And strangely, that makes me lighter. Many months later, on my 35th birthday, I drove to the ocean alone. Not the beach in Maine where the old cabin was gone, just a stretch of shoreline near the city, full of wind and rock. I brought the cassette recording, now converted into a file on my phone. I sat on the hood of my car and listened to Mary's voice through the static of time. I'm looking, Danny. I'm always looking. Waves struck the rocks, shattered white, then withdrew. I closed my eyes and imagined another version of my life. One where Mary lived, Thomas lived, and I grew up knowing I was loved without having to pay for it in installments of sacrifice. That version did not exist, but for the first time, I did not feel like only the child who had been robbed of it. I was the man who had found the door and walked through. As the sun sank lower, I took out my phone. There was an old message from Linda still sitting unread. "You will always have a place at home." I looked at the sentence for a long time. Then I deleted it, not out of hatred, because I finally understood that home is not a place where someone says you are allowed to stay if you keep playing the role they need. Home is where the truth of you is not locked in a tin box, not hidden behind a picture frame, not brought out as a bargaining chip at a birthday dinner. I stood, brushed sand from my clothes, and slipped Mary's letter into the inside pocket of my coat. Cold wind blew across my face and made my eyes sting. I turned my back to the ocean as the sky darkened, walking toward the car. The phone buzzed again, a call from the Maple Hollow house number. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I started the car, turned on the headlights, and drove toward the dark road ahead, no longer trying to see whether anyone was standing behind me.